My name is Mary Farrell, and I'm going to be chairing this session. So I'm very pleased to see so many in the audience. I think that's a testament both to your commitment to ACUNS and also to the sort of very distinguished panel that we have here this morning. We're a little bit late, so I'd like to begin straight away. And you will have on your program the names of our speakers, but certainly on behalf of ACUNS, I would like to welcome each of our speakers and to thank you for taking the time to be here this morning. I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting discussion. Just to say that we will follow the order of the panel as presented in the program, and I'm asking each of our speakers to stick to a 15-minute time, and just to say then that we will open the floor to questions, and we have a microphone here for questions from the audience. And I want to finish this session exactly on time at 12:30, because there is another panel, which is not a lunchtime panel, as Alistair has explained yesterday, but it is a midday panel, and it will be held in the other building in the Hague Institute. So for that reason, we need to be exactly on time. Okay, so without further ado, can I invite our first speaker, Sam Dawes.
Thank you very much, Mary. Delighted to be here. Rather than sticking to kind of prepared remarks, I thought it would be more useful not to duplicate a lot of the excellent contributions made so far, but to try and kind of respond or comment on things I found of particular interest and salience. So from the kind of the first session on the Security Council ICC relationship, where we had the excellent presentation from Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda, I think what struck me was the overlap between atrocity crimes often having to be held to account in situations of ongoing conflict, where the UN Security Council is already active through peace operations, diplomatic initiatives, sanctions, international tribunals, and so on. So everywhere from Lebanon, former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, DRC, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Sudan, you've got the interplay of the legal processes and the political processes. Now, the prosecutor was rightly reasserted that she makes her decisions based purely on legal bases, and that's right and proper. But it's also right and proper for the two communities of diplomats in and around the Security Council and jurists in the orbit of the ICC to take full account of the effects, intended and unintended, of their actions. Bensouda explained that she acts carefully to ensure that any actions of her office, from statements to decisions to investigate or prosecute, will not be undertaken if it would worsen a situation. She said she asks if it would have an impact on deterring crimes, and she interprets the discretion given to the prosecutor under Article 53 of the Rome Statute, the interests of justice clause, in terms of the interests of victims. Now, since Article 53 is invoked in the first instance, at the really early stage while evidence is still being gathered, i.e. when no formal victims have been identified, the victims she's referring to are most likely future victims that would suffer in the hypothetical case that a conflict or situation were to be made worse by ICC interventions. So to make this assessment requires a high degree of awareness of ongoing and often private peace settlement processes. This requires real-time information exchange and the capacity to analyse it. It also means that the prosecutor does implicitly have to take into account the interests of peace, although her office could never style it in that way, because indeed the mechanisms under the Rome Statute to take account for the interests of peace, the mechanisms at the disposal of the UN Security Council, are simply a deferral for 12 months and then another deferral. So that is scant reassurance to an accused head of state to act differently, because they know that when political constellations change, they will likely become vulnerable. So it's really the real locus of political impact is with the prosecutor's discretion. So there's certain moments, I think, which could be enhanced for taking stock and having increased dialogue between the political and the legal camps, as it were. These moments include the case selection and the complementarity and admissibility reviews. For the Security Council and the diplomats, both on the Security Council and the Secretariat supporting, there are sort of other questions to be asked. What is our overall objective in the short, medium, and long term relating to a particular country or region? What priorities and resources do we give to different legal mechanisms, both the international and national? What do tactical decisions relating to referrals and deferrals by the UN Security Council, how do these tactical decisions relate to a wider strategy? Now, selectivity is the nature of decision-making of political organs, both because of differing political objectives, but also because of finite financial or human resources. And as a colleague from Miranda raised with Bensouda, the decision to refer or defer a case by the Security Council is a political decision, and there remains a risk that
Maybe we're closer. We're killing it.
We're So one key area and a challenge, thank you, let's try this, is in donors. I think donors have two pressures which are pulling in opposite directions and have implications for justice. One is the recognition, widely recognized in the post-2015 debates, that institutions matter and that actually addressing strong institutions, corruption, peaceful societies is absolutely a bedrock for development and access to justice. On the other hand, at a time of austerity and financial cutbacks, donors increasingly facing skeptical public views on development assistance. And so they are moving towards prioritizing, both in their bilateral and in their multilateral funding, short-term measurable impacts like immunizing children or the amount of books that are circulated in schools. So this emphasis on measurable short-term quantity is actually the opposite of what development expertise is telling us is the real driver of change. Earlier this week, the Independent Commission for Aid Impact in the UK put out a report, and it summed it up quite well. They said that despite the fantastic commitments of the UK towards the 0.7 UN target, we're concerned that the emphasis is on short-term measurable results over the more complex challenges of achieving long-term measurable results. Now, the direction of travel of the development agenda, the challenges ahead, are also, I think, have significant impact for justice. The 5 transformational shifts required in development between now and 2030 in the design of new goals, targets and indicators that the high-level panel on post-2015 put out, I think are particularly pertinent. The first one is about leaving no one behind, regardless of their ethnicity, gender, geography, diversity, race or sexual orientation. And this is really deemed to, it's essential that everybody is not denied basic economic opportunities or human rights. So it's a way of bringing the human rights dimension into the development agenda in a way that's acceptable to all parties. The second is putting sustainable development at the core, and we heard this conference about climate change as an essential driver of widening future inequality. The third, that growth must be socially inclusive. It must be dynamic and inclusive, particularly of young people and women. The fourth, building peace and effective and open accountable institutions. I mentioned that, and there's certain indicators that would actually be a real shift in the building blocks of justice, such as actually measuring, this is one area where measurement is important, measuring the right to identity documents, because without actually something that certifies when you were born and your unique identity, you're then denied a whole swathe of access to justice and rights in the future. And the fifth is forging a new global partnership. And this must be beyond kind of the staid debate about NGOs, accreditation to DPI or ECOSOC status, but rather actually a deeper, reflecting more, I think, the major groups of the Rio Plus 20 conference, a deeper engagement with non-state actors at all levels in the private sector, empowering entrepreneurship and creativity and solidarity. So what are the implications for UN bodies of this kind of the changing nature of development and the funding that provides the building blocks for access to justice and security? Well, one is that I've talked about the new partnership. It involves new actors. It also involves new ways of working. So less hierarchical, more horizontal. Abby Williams talked about kind of the networking, utilizing new technology, and I particularly praise of Tom Biersticker's Sanctions app and the Leiden University Big Data project on justice and security as examples of actually embracing the changing nature of the world and kind of unlocking what will be, I think, a remarkable driver of access to justice in the future, the proliferation of smartphone technology in the developing world. The other major shift, I suppose, in not justice, but it connects strongly to it, is the rise of non-state actors, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, Boko Haram. These transnational terrorist groups and organized crime, they're not structured on the assumption of deterrence. So the international juridical system, the whole assumptions based on liberal Western legal order don't work to counter the motivations of these non-state actors. Indeed, they reject international humanitarian law. They directly target UN humanitarian workers because they regard the UN as illegitimate because it upholds a system of laws, norms and rules that they reject. And they target girls' access to education, another essential building block of justice and just institutions. So forms of justice must evolve to reflect the changing character of war. My last comments, I suppose, we're looking at this a whole range of reform processes as we approach UN 70, from the peace-building institutions review, which I think very importantly involves UNDP. It's very important that the different bits of the UN, the development and the security apparatus, are not siloed in this area. The review of 1325, again, in terms of key implications for the involvement of half of the world's population. The Ramos-Horta panel, which we'll report later this month, and the coming together of the post-2015 and climate change negotiations. We see in all of these also I wouldn't say a crisis, but I think a real danger of a breakdown in trust between North and South, and challenges to multilateral cooperation, from trade to climate change. And Abby Williams was right in his John Holmes lecture to say that while compositional reform of the Security Council was deadlocked, this does not mean that we should do nothing. To me, the biggest gap in the Council's legitimacy is not which countries aspire to recognition of their status and power. It's the fact that up to 75% of the Council's country-specific agenda focuses on Africa, yet African agency in the decisions affecting the continent is still not prominent in either formal or informal procedures of the Council. And I understand it's obligatory to mention Sepp Blatter, the scandal, and FIFA in remarks in Aiken speeches now. But it was striking. I'm not coming to the defense of Sepp Blatter, but it's striking the universal support he received from African nations. One could posit a lot of cynical motives for Blatter's courting of African national football federations. But the fact he did bring about a change in power relations in Africa and Asian agency in FIFA, where in the 1960s there was very little involvement and a power of those countries. The president of the Nigerian Football Federation said this to the BBC: Blatter feels Africa, he sees Africa. What Blatter pushes is equity, fairness and equality among the nations. And I think that's an important reminder that these qualities, being seen, being treated with equality and respect, are the prerequisites for conversations about justice and security. And in relation to UN operations in the ICC, this means helping support the mechanisms of the AU and African sub-regional actors, as well as that of the Arab League, the GCC and the OIC. And it likely means funding AU peace operations endorsed by the UN Security Council through UN regular budget and peacekeeping assessed contributions. And it means the development of African-run and African-owned judicial mechanisms. Because it's not enough to point to reasonable explanations for why the ICC focuses on Africa. There needs to be a wider conversation, actually, that enhances African agency and sees Africa in all these bodies. I think that will be the shift that really matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sam. Very wide-ranging and I think very enriching vision. You heard it here first. Sepp Blatter for a Nobel Prize. I don't think you were saying that. Okay, can I invite Mr. Liu, our next speaker?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Really, I shall thank the Aiken for the invitation to come to The Hague to attend the plenary meeting. Really, it's a pleasure. It's an honor. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share my view with you. I will talk about the global governance, security, justice, roughly in three parts. I will say a few words about the UN, how to see UN, how to see UN. My comment is positive, of course. Then is what kind of a challenge that facing us. Then what kind of a feature of global governance that we wish to have and we shall have. When we talk about the global governance, security and justice, I think the UN play a very leading role and contribute a lot to global security, to justice, is one of the important players in terms of global governance. So their job, their contribution to me is really commendable. As you all know, the UN have 3 pillars. One is security, then is development, then is human rights. For the security, just to highlight a few of the points, we can see UN is everywhere whenever there's a crisis, political crisis, national conflicts, or even internal turmoils, and so on and so forth. And also the peacekeeping, peace building, peacemaking operations also, altogether about 17 operations, and so currently probably 16 operations in service, and so many human resources and financial resources has been invested. You just mentioned the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. They got that, it's a Nobel Prize winner for that. That proves really their job in this area is commendable and is well done. Then also the disarmament in terms of contribution to the security in that area, a lot has been done. Quite a lot conventions and treaties have been reached, and also the quite a lot UN General Assembly resolutions on disarmament and arms control, and also they had 3 special UN sessions exclusively on disarmament and arms control. And they also launched about 4 disarmament decades for the sake of global security, and also fight against terrorism and also non-proliferation of the weapons of mass destruction. Then, for the security, it is said the drafter of the UN Charter hope that the human being could have 50 years with peace without a world war. Because the first one to second one is a very short period. They hope that could be 50 years. That would be long enough. But now, luckily, there's no world war. It's already in 70s. I don't see any world war, say, in the next 30 years, which means within 100 years, we don't have a world war. Could be longer. For the development, I assume, and I consider the UN also have done quite a lot. For example, the UN also launched quite a few, 4 development decades, starting even from the 1960s, in order to push development. And also encourage South-South cooperation, and also South-North dialogue, and also have a special arrangement for the least developed countries, for Africa, and also special arrangement for the debt relief. So basically, also there is a 0.7% of GNP of developed countries to put it as an ODA, official development assistance for the developing country. I know there are quite a few countries have not reached that point, but to see it in a positive way, so far there are quite a lot of money is there. For example, according to my knowledge, in the year 2013, there are already about 130 million US dollars has been devoted, the ODA, to the South countries. I believe it helps a lot. That means UNDP and UNICEF, UNPF, I assume they have done a lot, of course, and also the Millennium Development Goal, which will finish the end of this year. Then we have a follow-up one, which is post-2015 Sustainable Development Goal. All these contribute a lot. Then human rights area, I shall say the progress made is remarkable. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, even in the early 1948. It's a milestone, I shall say. And also the UN conventions over, most notably, quite a few, on the genocide, racial discrimination, torture, civil political rights, economic and social and cultural rights, and so on and so forth. Quite a lot, the conventional treaties has been adopted in order to helping the weak, the old, the fragile. Apart from that, they also UN Declaration on the Right of Development, conduct quite a few World Conference on Human Rights, and also UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has been appointed, and also we know we received a keynote speaker yesterday. International Criminal Court, another tribunals has been established, and so over the 70 years, the UN has overseen the negotiation and birth of more than 300 legal instruments, which largely shape the world from the rule by power to the rule of law. So I shall say, really, is a great progress in this area. Then I'll say a few words about the challenge that we are facing just now. This morning, first speaker I mentioned, touch upon a little bit. So in the past 70 years, in terms of global governance, with UN as a major player, a lot has been done, yet there are still a lot need to be addressed, no doubt about it, partially due to the complex or even severities of the problem per se, partially due to the short of authority and efficiency of the UN. And of course, we now today we're facing quite a lot problems and challenges like regional conflicts, Ukraine crisis, national turmoil, terrorist extremists, ISIL, environmental problems, climate changes, and also internet securities and nuclear issues, pandemic disease, organized crime, and so on and so forth. So the big challenge, I believe, is the North-South divide, which I believe is the root cause of the imbalance problems around the world. So the global problems, we have the global problem and we need global solutions. We shall have a robust global governance to address these challenges and problems. And how to ensure the security and justice with regard to the global governance and the UN in face of such a situation and challenges. As you all know, the world has undergone significant changes. The rising of developing countries, the multipolarization of the world patterns, and so on and so forth. These provide spaces for the brand new model global governance. How it should be, I have few thought about. The new model of global governance shall reflect the growing weight of the emerging powers and increase the representation of developing countries in multilateral institutions and other norm-setting bodies. The UNDP indicated in its report in 2013 that the altered geography of the global power caused by the economic rise of the emerging nations is a big challenge to the global governance. The reform of the global government shall encourage inclusiveness, which cause the greater infusion of creative ideas and individuals from developing countries and emerging powers in tackling collective global problems. Currently, the important parts of the existing system, such as Bretton Woods institutions, do not include developing countries in their decision-making processes. It is desire to strengthen the representativeness, transparency, and accountability of these agencies by involving a more diverse and representative group of countries. Secondly, they emerged quite a few new multilateral actors, including Brazil, India, and South Africa Dialogue Forum, G20, and EU-China Summit, and also East part of EU-China Summit, BRICS, could be plus G7 or G8 or APEC. They are different from the UN, IMF, World Bank, since they are informal, just meet regularly. However, they are very powerful and they shall have a better role to play. Thirdly, is to establish a mechanism or forum with the participation of the UN and other actors, including NGOs, regional organizations, academia, and so on and so forth, to form a synergy. The UN, of course, shall integrate other actors and coordinate policies and actions. The UN shall play a leading role and central role as the convener and a principal forum for coordination. All actors shall form a coalition and act cooperatively. The fourth, I think, shall be a stronger UN is needed. Embracing more inclusive system of global governance does not mean replacing and marginalizing the UN. Rather, on the contrary, UN's rule shall be further strengthened. The world today needs a stronger and a more effective UN. Of course, UN shall improve itself. A lot has been discussed regarding UN reform. Obviously, there's a need. But the aim of the reform, in my opinion, is solely, exclusively, to make UN more effective, more efficient. Fifth, there were rooms and spaces to play for NGO, civil societies, think tanks. Their full involvement will bring benefit to the global governance. And the sixth is member states are also crucial actors. They shall offer their full support to the UN, so to maintain or increase UN authority. This is very important. Member states shall pursue win-win strategy instead of zero-sum game, shall surmount differences of religions, races, political system, culture, and to demonstrate full respect to each other. Member states shall work and cooperate hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder, within the framework of UN. Not on the contrary seeking national or group interests. By so doing, we can make the world more secure and justifiable. I support multilateralism. I don't support unilateralism. And I'm convinced that UN Charter and shall be strictly observed by all. What about China? Since I came from China, I may say a few words. China supports UN and supports other actors to play their respective role with regard to the global governance. I think China will contribute more. Suppose on peacekeeping operation, it participated in 24 operations in total with 30,000 personnel on fields and contributes $500 million per year. And China is the largest contributor among the P5. China has acceded to over 400 multilateral treaties, gradual but incredible integration into the world. And also I'm convinced that China's proposal to establish the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank will also contribute to the global security and justice through real actions to yield tangible economic progress and development, so to achieve the security and justice. I'm also convinced that China's initiative for the Silk Road economic belt and the 21st century maritime Silk Road, that means the Belt and the Road Initiative, will also contribute to the global justice and security. Ladies and gentlemen, global governance is in flux. In a more interdependent and interconnected world, a robust, coherent, transparent, accountable global governance regime is critical, so to ensure global security and justice. I believe that as long as the international community and all related actors get united, form a coalition, and act in accordance with the UN Charter, the future of the global governance and the UN could be in a position to ensure security and justice, presenting a safer and better world to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wu, for that. Very inspiring. inspiring, very ambitious agenda, and I think there will be lots there for discussion afterwards. Let me move now and invite Nico to take the floor.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning to everybody. Yesterday, Abby Williams called in his Holmes lecture Justice, the junior partner of security. And I thought, let me pay this Saturday morning some justice to this junior partner by focusing on a rule of law issue, which is perhaps very important for the maintenance of security in the long term, and that relates to the global protection of human rights. In fact, next year, it is exactly 50 years ago that the two principal human rights covenants have been adopted. As Mr. Liu stated, we have many more. We have 10 core human rights treaties, and we have some other specific treaties. And perhaps it is worthwhile, on the eve of this anniversary in 2016, to recall what was the original intention. In 1945, we had some provisions, very meager provisions, on human rights protection in the United Nations Charter. But as early as 1948, we got already the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the intention was that there would be a trinity, a declaration, one treaty, and one monitoring system. Now, 65 years later, we have to note that we have a host of treaties. We have a proliferation of monitoring bodies. I have the honor of serving on one of them. And I know that there is a lot of overlap, and I know that the global architecture for protection of human rights is subject to considerable improvement. But I also know, from my 7 years work on that Human Rights Committee of the United Nations, that things move very slowly, if at all. So obviously, my idealism would have it that I would now advocate the conclusion of that one single World Human Rights Treaty, as intended in 1948. But my more practical approach, my reality has it that that is not feasible. So therefore, just a plea to conclude perhaps on the occasion of the 50th anniversary next year, a kind of technical protocol in order to facilitate cooperation between various treaty bodies, most notably between the two principal ones, the Human Rights Committee in the field of civil and political rights, and the other in the field of economic and social rights. But with a view to establish in future joint monitoring mechanisms and joint complaints procedures of all treaty bodies, and maybe perhaps in future, I hope I will still be alive, ultimately to have one common worldwide human rights treaty. Of course, you know that there are many differences between the various categories of human rights. When we talk about civil and political rights, we talk about the right to life, about the right to be protected against torture, against physical violence, the right to equal treatment, freedom rights, including expression, religion, opinion. And the other category, in fact, the category in which I am working, that relates to the right to work, the right to education, the right to form trade unions, the right to social security, but in a way that also relates to the rights to life. It also relates to the right to equal treatment. And non-discrimination is really a cross-cutting general principle for nearly all human rights treaties. But when one had to decide in the 50s, basically as a result of Cold War rivalry, not to go for one treaty, but for two separate treaties, we entered into different avenues, the categories of civil and political rights on the one hand, and the others on economic, social and cultural rights diverged. We got two treaties, finally in 1966. They entered into force in 1976, by the way, in the same year. And yeah, it is interesting to note that they have a similar number of state parties, at the moment around 165 for each, but admittedly not exactly the same states. The country of my distinguished neighbor is a party to the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and they report very well. I had the honor of serving as the rapporteur on the economic, social and cultural rights in China. But I see here many people from the United States, and unfortunately, so far, the United States has not ratified the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And for China, it is the opposite. You have signed, but not yet ratified the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Yet, there are many similarities. 160 of the 165 state parties are basically the same. The ICCPR has already for a long time, the Civil and Political Rights Covenant has already for a long time a complaints mechanism in place. And as you know, the Human Rights Committee is doing a very interesting job in that field. And 113 parties, state parties, have subscribed to it. But now, in the field of economic and social rights, since 2 years, since May 2013, we also have a complaints mechanism in place. And at the moment we have 20 state parties, but that will slowly grow. And in fact, I return tomorrow to Geneva. On Monday morning, we take up our third or fourth complaint. So not so many, but we are of course very excited that victims come to Geneva since they alleged that they could not find redress in their home state. And as you know, the basic rule is first exhaust local remedies before you call on international mechanisms. But then we have an overlap in the complaints mechanism. We certainly also have an overlap in quite a number of rights. I mentioned already the right to equal treatment, or the right to form trade unions, which is both a civil and political right, and a social and economic right. In fact, both committees have 18 members, 18 independent members. Well, my standard joke is always that you can see who's really independent when it rains a lot, because as it did a couple of days ago, because then I think I'm independent. I arrive without an umbrella, which I've got at home. I left my coat somewhere, so I'm wet. But then I see the car of some missions, permanent missions to the United Nations, bringing some of my colleagues. And I think, well, are you really independent? Huh? The secretariat of both committees is the same. Both of them are serviced by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And so I could continue that, in fact, there are quite a number of similarities, and synergies could be proposed basically in an easy way if at a political level, at the conference of the state parties, of course, we can generate support for it. In my view, of course, one single unified treaty body would be the best. But that is something for a distant future. So therefore, we meet now Tuesday morning, and I give it a try with you. I come with some practical proposals for our discussion with Prince Said, the new High Commissioner. And we have a discussion on the program for celebrating 50 years of international covenants, what we can do in order to improve, with a big phrase, the global architecture for human rights protection, and by setting some small steps. And at a certain moment you have to do something. And I believe that the occasion of the 50th anniversary is a very good moment for that. And yes, I know, there are many other treaty bodies as well. We have at least 10 at the moment, but all of them have a kind of similar way of working. They review the the reports of states. Of course, you can never fully believe states. So yes, we study very carefully the reports by the state parties. But we also would like to speak to the UN agencies in the countries, to the UN country teams. We would like to have what we call shadow reporting by non-governmental organizations, and we all take that into account. And no matter whether it relates to the Women's Rights Committee, or Economic and Social Rights Committee, or the Children's Rights Committee, we have that self-reporting by states, and you can't trust them at face value, and you have shadow reporting from all kinds of other sources. And many have indeed individual complaints procedures. For the sake of time, I will not mention that, but there is a lot of overlap, and we are all in the same building, Palais Wilson, with the High Commissioner, now Prince Said from Jordan. And so I believe it is time to try to make some perhaps minor adjustment first. So we have already now a kind of common core document, not for every reporting. A human rights and state party has to submit a new report to the United Nations. There can be a common core document. We have now achieved general reporting guidelines, and I believe we should go further with that. So I believe that we should try to streamline the procedures, for example, by agreeing on a reporting calendar. That more or less around the same time, a country, let's say in a period of 2 years, is under review in human rights treaty bodies which have similar concerns, the women's rights, the children's rights, the economic, social and cultural rights. In fact, they come rather close to each other. And perhaps we can sometimes also arrive at joint conclusions, and if possible also at joint recommendations. And perhaps 1 or 2 years later, we may well have a memorandum of understanding. Of course, as an international lawyer, I would like to make that the basis of a joint protocol, a more official treaty, and perhaps the state parties can even sign up for it, so that we establish a joint monitoring mission and maybe also a joint complaints procedure. Why not? Now that so many human rights treaty bodies have complaints procedures, officially we call that communication procedures because it is not a judicial procedure. But in this way, I have a number of small steps in my mind to improve the human rights treaty system and to improve bit by bit in an incremental way the global protection of human rights. And of course my hidden agenda is to arrive, hopefully sooner than later, but I think it will be very late, at that one particular World Human Rights Treaty, as it was intended in 1948, and to arrive at that one particular World Supervisory Body, as it was intended in 48. For the moment, we don't call that a World Court of Human Rights, because that will scare all state parties, but we call it a joint monitoring body for a better protection of human rights, or whatever diplomatic phrase. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I think also a lot to talk about in this session. And could I invite Stephen to take the floor?
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasant but also daunting task of addressing you as the last speaker of this morning. And with that in mind, I have decided to present you with a short exposé which centers around the question what elements would be conducive to a stronger rule of the law in the world, and if some innovative thinking can produce results in that respect. I have 3 of those elements. 1 is to organize more mediation. 2 is to formulate inventive breaks on the right of veto. And 3, make the International Court of Justice a more powerful institution. On mediation, the main idea is that we should not only embrace the positive notion of adjudication by the international courts and tribunals, but that we should add the element of mediation to it. The Hague has developed into a city of peace and justice, but international talks about difficult international issues are hardly ever held here. Nearly always it is Geneva or London or Paris, and that is strange to say the least. One would expect more. My observation is that countries which have decided to submit a case to the courts are past the point of international mediation. And my observation is also that mediation is a different type of activity from court decisions. Still, mediation is a highly useful tool to bring disputes to a peaceful continuation, and not seldom a case is being withdrawn from the list of cases of the ICJ after talks have led to a satisfactory solution. This was, for instance, the case between Ecuador and Colombia, that was about spraying of chemicals to fight the narco trade, and between Australia and Timor-Leste most recently, and that was about the stealing of intelligence. But I do not know if a third party was helpful in getting these results established. At present, the UN has a long list of ongoing mediations run by the Department of Political Affairs, often taking the shape of a special envoy of the Security Council, who acts on the basis of a mandate formulated by the Security Council. Mediation, or the provision of good offices, is an important part of the business of the UN. If we look now at the next 10 or 20 years, The Hague should definitely create a facility to support international mediations as a new contribution to international peace and security. And I think that the Hague Institute for Global Justice could play a leading role in that respect. However, the city and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should believe in this concept, as it would otherwise make no sense. The argument that the Netherlands are a part of the European Union and therefore has to talk with sealed lips should not be held against this idea, because it often is. If I mention mediation, I do not necessarily think about armed conflict in the first place, especially in the preparatory stages of conflicts brewing over food distribution, water allocation, natural resources more generally, or religious influence. Mediation will prove to be helpful, and it is the help and intervention by a third party which makes that a conflict may be looked at from a new angle. Sometimes even the intervention of more than one state has proved to be very conducive to restoring peaceful relations, and I think about cases about a national park in South America. So that I say about mediation. We should strengthen it and do more about it in The Hague. On the right of veto, I would like to bring to your attention something about the position of those who have that right, the 5 permanent members. Sooner or later, all the big players will have to recognize that it is better to be able to carry out the mandate of the UN than to protect national interest with their veto power. In this ongoing debate, it would help considerably, in my view, if a new concept would be applied, namely that permanent members can exercise their right of objection only if and when another permanent member would do the same. So one veto does not count. It will have to be supported by another of the big 5. Even better would it be that a national veto by one of the permanent members is impossible if the Security Council has a big majority to authorize or to prohibit an activity, when such a majority does include the express majority of the permanent members. So if 3 out of 5 are in a very large majority, then it should be impossible for the others to block it. In this connection, it is obvious to me that the continued existence of the special position of the 5 permanent members is a given fact, and that nothing in the world will take that away from these states. But these 2 ideas of, say, a more restrained use of the veto power could help to alleviate blockades which so often hit the work and the effectiveness of the Security Council, and which have so deeply hampered the effective role of international law in the past. You will no doubt counter these remarks with the objection, is this realistic thinking? No, it may be a bit of diplomatic daydreaming, I admit that. Not for the moment so, but it may help in the current debate and in this report about the global security, justice and governance. Also, the report tries, I see, to formulate some forms of restraint. But it would help in the current debate to look closely at the weaker points of the system, and certainly the continued stalemate of the Security Council over important matters is such one weak spot. On the increase of coverage of the International Court of Justice, I would like to say the following. This is about the effectiveness of the courts and tribunals, more particularly the work of the International Court of Justice. The ICJ is a strong institution. It delivers very important decisions in disputed cases and, of course, advisory opinions at the request of the UN. But its reach is hampered by the fact that only 70 out of 193 nations have declared that they accept the competence of the court in advance. And my sad observation is that the majority of the nations in the world does not recognize the International Court of Justice as a matter of principle. They may do so in the context of a special treaty, like in the world of the environment, or diplomatic rules, or cultural heritage, but a general acceptance of the court is absent. And for me, it is clear that the states have never wished to create a fully operational Supreme Court of the world. Not in 1922, at the time of the League of Nations, and not in 1945, when the UN was created. The settlement of disputes through a court of law is available for those countries who themselves accept to be bound by the rulings of the court. So it looks like a court, it is bound by international law, and it produces decisions under international law, but it has the features of arbitration with independent judges. And still the basis among states is weak. Of the 5 permanent members of the UN, only the UK has expressed its acceptance of the competence of the court, but even excluding disputes related to the Commonwealth of Nations. The other 4 permanent members do have the pleasure of sending a judge to the ICJ, but they do not, as countries, subscribe to the system. This is a debate in which I will go no further, but it only shows that the present system is far from perfect. The respected Secretary Generals of the UN have repeatedly called for an extension of this list of nations that accept the court on the basis of a general declaration. So for an extension of the number of national acceptances, but not much came out of it. In 10 years, the list increased from 65 to 70. So I wonder if a more radical approach would not be right. And that more radical approach would be to simply delete the principle of prior acceptance of the court. This will lead to a deletion of the article which lays down the need of a special recognition of the court, Article 36 of the statute, and those articles closely linked to it. It would, in fact, produce a generalized competence of the ICJ to settle international dispute, basically just like the Security Council, and it would open the door to the settlement of issues which now have to remain outside the scope. Let me simply point at the fact that the dispute settlement system of the World Trade Organization is without exception, and so is the system of the Law of the Sea Tribunal in Hamburg. That some states refuse to appear is an important point that speaks for itself. And of course, serious consideration should be given to all the pros and the cons. But this idea of doing away with all this prior acceptance business and just have a court that can settle international disputes would seem to me a new impetus to the debate. At present, some 120 states in the world can lean back and say, well, if a case comes by involving my country, I will see what to do then. I hasten to add that the ICJ is not without arms. It has a firm basis, as I said, in many international conventions, and these allow for an entry door to the court. For instance, Argentina did fight Uruguay before the International Court of Justice on the basis of a bilateral treaty concerning river management. But Argentina does not recognize the ICJ generally. The German leader, Angela Merkel, keeps on stating that the taking of the Crimea is against international law. She calls it illicit, or illegal. But this will never come before the International Court of Justice. It's just politics. It would never land on a strip of the International Court of Justice. Now, and as a necessary counterweight of this radical change, the ICJ should be given the power to send cases before it, first to a phase of mediation, just as is the case in the national courts nowadays. This would be the best way to go if the conflict is mainly political and does not provide for legal questions which can be answered on the basis of international law. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I gave you these thoughts in the most quickest way I could, and I hope that it makes you reflect a bit on the role that international law can play in the future. Thank you very much. Very well.
Thank you very much for that very succinct and very, very interesting presentation. I would now like to, and thank you to our four speakers for really excellent timekeeping. I think that makes it better for the audience because now we have some more time to take questions. So I would like to invite questions from the floor. Could I ask you to give your name and I take 3 questions at a time. Okay, yes. Please.
Thank you. Thanks to the speakers. My name is Joel Stark from the Hague Institute for Global Justice. One question for Professor Stever, but I think it also relates to the talk by Mr. Van Hoogstraten. And he talked about slow progress and more countries should accept either human rights treaties or jurisdictional courts. But I mean, there's also countervailing tendencies today. If you look at the UK, where now the ruling party is openly discussing withdrawal from the ECHR, and also a referendum of EU membership is also a referendum of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU. So if we have discussions like that in a country that used to be at the forefront of those debates, I'm wondering what's next, what treaties will be next, maybe international human rights treaties as well, and in which other countries might is it a special English thing, or is it maybe more reflective of changing attitude to human rights and international law in other countries as well?
And the question is?
Gaston Center for Diplomatic Studies in Paris. My question is to Mr. Schreiber. Which role do you give to UPR, the Universal Periodic Review, in the global architecture for human rights protection? Do you see it as a parallel mechanism or as a complementary mechanism? Thank you.
And yes.
Thank you. My name is Michael Yu. I'm asking this question under the hat of James Professor Roy with Law and Economics Cambodia, where I'm living in the past 3 years. My question is to the first speakers. I absolutely agree with you, Professor Dons, that the justice should be developed. But on another side of the world, there's something called donor justice, where all the priorities of the agenda have been set by the donors of the West, not necessarily understand the local situations. Whatever is trendy, whatever is prioritized is actually set by some foreign countries in the West. That in context with the emergent economic mighty of China make it more fragmented. Development is pushed by one side, justice is pushed by another side. I see the lack of coordination on this. I wonder if you two have any comments on that. Thank you.
Okay, so let's hear from our panel and then I'll take another round of questions. How do you want to proceed?
Yeah, shall I start?
Yes. Okay.
Two very interesting questions were addressed to me. The first one relates to Brexit and the upcoming referendum on the island opposite the coast of the Netherlands, if I may say so. And yes, of course we are a little bit concerned, but at the same time, I do believe that we will succeed to keep the bridge within Europe, but perhaps it will require some leadership on both sides of the North Sea. So I do hope that Mr. Cameron will not enter into an anti-Europe campaign, since the United Kingdom is so much part of Europe, and since we really do need them for the further evolution of the European Union, as well as for the Council of Europe. But I do see that there are indeed some problems, and you referred, among other documents, to the European Convention on Human Rights. I think, for older European states, to borrow a phrase from the former State Secretary for Defense of the United States, for old Europe, I think it is still a little bit difficult to swallow that we have a European Court of Human Rights, which perhaps consists in majority of New Europe, the Central and Eastern European countries. And there have been tendencies in the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, which also, in my view as a lawyer, went quite far. But recently, you can note that there is more credit for what is called the margin of appreciation, that you also have to leave a considerable degree to a member state for framing its policy, and for the principle of subsidiarity, which is in human rights law, but also in EU policy, a very leading principle. And I think that can come to the credit also of the criticism of the United Kingdom. So if they want to blow that up a bit, we will be silent, at least in the Netherlands, and we give Cameron credit for that. And also in another couple of areas, I think there is room for compromises, and that not everything has to be dealt by Brussels, or for that matter by Strasbourg. Then the question from Paris about the Universal Periodic Review, which is now in place, I think, for about 8 years. It started, I think, in 2007. And let me admit that I was wrong. I did not expect much from it, because it is very political. But it is not only a periodic review, but it is also a peer review. So it is not an independent review. The human rights committees to which I referred, the treaty bodies or the courts, they consist of independent, between quotation marks, experts. And of course the peer review, that is the human rights review by other states, of one state by other states. Yet, especially for the states which fail to report, which are very late with reporting. This week we had Uganda under review, and they came 22 years too late. That was a record. And recently we had Afghanistan, 17 years too late, okay. All kinds of excuses for the 1990s, but not for the last 8-9 years. But since 2007, they are always subjected to the UPR. Whether you like it or not. And we have some countries which are not a party to some of the human rights treaties, and they are examined in public for the full range of human rights, because the party line of the United Nations is that all rights are interrelated, indivisible, in order to be universal human rights. And that is the good thing about the UPR. At the same time, of course, it is short, 3 hours. It is a peer review. It is not based on extensive reporting. So indeed, as you phrased it, it's complementary, but it is useful. And we always use it. At least I, as a member of a human rights treaty body, I always look what was discussed in the context of the UPR.
Thank you. Let me take another round of questions, and I have...
Yes, it were.
Okay, yes, sorry.
Thanks. I was going to answer the question addressed to me and my colleague about donor justice, and whether what the implications of that are, conditionalities that donors might place, which might incentivize justice or not. I think something I didn't have time for in my remarks was, but which is important, is the three key changes that are occurring between now and 2030 and beyond in terms of aid. I think aid will increasingly be dwarfed by remittances, foreign direct investment, and domestic resource mobilization. And this is going to fundamentally change the dynamics of the North-South relationship and the ability for any conditionalities to have effect. Secondly, what aid does remain will be focused almost entirely on conflict-affected countries on the basis that conflict is development in reverse. And there the donor dynamic is different, less altruistically led and more national interest led. So again, I think it underplays and undermines conditionality. And lastly, the human protection agenda. I think that the vast numbers of people suffering from dislocation from war and human rights abuses by governments, particularly in the wake of Arab Spring, that potentially the calculations are changing regarding the balance between support for democratic movements to overthrow totalitarian regimes and because of the fallout. And that's a challenge for accountability. So I think the direction of travel, whether we like it or not, is actually more about less obligatory and more voluntary commitments. And there the challenge for the post-2015 agenda, and I outlined how important it was for the building blocks of justice, will not be agreement on goals, targets, and indicators, will be ownership of those goals, targets, and indicators. And there, I think the very positive potential is in technology and the distribution even to the poorest of the ability to communicate through smartphones and other means. So it actually be citizens holding their governments to account rather than donor aid being the driver of accountability. And then my last point on that is I think there's an analogy with the climate change negotiations, which really have so far are sort of bottom-up voluntary commitments. There, China, and my colleague can say more, is under-promising, but I think will be overachieving. And I think potentially we have that potential. There's a lot of agreement between China and other G7 countries on tackling corruption. That's not because of a top-down obligation, but it's because of recognition of the value in creating prosperous and stable society and from pressure from citizens. So I think that is likely to be the driving force. That doesn't mean that multilateral institutions won't be absolutely essential, both as creators of norms and of deliverers of public goods. But it does mean, I think, there's going to be a shift from enforcement to, other than peace and security field, to enforcement to kind of other forms of incentivization.
Well, just add one point or two, because I agree with Mr. Dons. For the donors, my personal limited experience that to receive donations, basically the best way is through the UN. UN, at least, in my view, there are no political conditions. But there are requirement conditions mainly for the administrative, how to manage the money, how can the money will be used, really go to the grassroots. Well, some donor countries might have, I don't know, I heard that also, might be some political conditions. It depends. If their condition is, the purpose is to intervene your national sovereignty, whatever, that probably is difficult to accept it. If they have some condition in order to help you to have a better management, a good use of the funding, to me, is sound, is reasonable, because there are corruptions, like in China, not to say some other countries. The second question you're talking about development and justice. I thought maybe you expect me to say something about China. Well, yes, with more development in China now, yeah, there are a lot of corruptions. I admit that. But now the new government, the new ruling parties always there, not new, but there. The runners of the country, the runner of the countries, and they are working very hard, actually. You can see from the media, a lot happened. Something to a certain scale, to me, unexpected. that show the determination of the new leaders. So, and there are some changes actually when you do some trial or whatever. Even there are mobile calls. Right? They have mobile calls or do something not within their own area because maybe you are the mafia of that region. Sorry, move you to somewhere in order for justice, for transparent, for the accountability. So yes, if you have less development, you don't require for another rise. But China developed to a certain scale, and people are really very much want to see changes. But actually, the government also doing something. Some in the past, and everything is within the power of the government. Today, the people, the grassroots, can suit you. You are a civil servant, you are the runner of the local government, they can suit you in the law. Sometimes you failed. It happened. It's unbelievable to me. So I'm expecting more changes. I sense the determination of the new group of the leaders on the top. So I'm expecting also, like you, more changes in China. I'm pretty confident.
Follow up. Do you expect China to export this experience to other countries, maybe through the UN platform? Because justice goes together with development after a while.
If there is a forum to share with our experiences, it might be the case. Why not? Like the forum like this, we are invited and we like to share. We speak from bottom of our heart for the sake of the development. But I don't think we deliberately go to a country and say, look, I want to share with you. We can say that it's nice, it's good. I don't think we do that. We didn't do that in the past. I don't think we'll do that in the future because that's probably the culture of China. But we do like to share an experience as long as that experience is considered sound and countable. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to take a second round of questions, and I have, yes, dear.
Louis Dritter, Harvard University. To Professor Schreiber, after great talks by all of you. Following up on Therese Gasto's point on the Universal Periodic reports. The UPRs into the new Human Rights Council by states on the situation of human rights. What you are proposing, the word card on human rights, would be supposedly submitted by individuals having associate legal remedies at the national level, at the regional level, on the legal grounds of the convention, the 10 conventions you mentioned. The idea has been ventilated many times, even in conferences we had in Harvard. And I remember a conversation with Mary Robinson and others. Could it be conceivable that at one of the next World Summits, like the one in 2005, when the Human Rights Council was created out of the Commission, that perhaps something could be ventilated? It would take time, and I think there is currency for the idea. One would have to, I find it fascinating that you bring it up, and I'm sure you want to give some elements that you all can go home as you ambassadors for the idea. To have the joint complaint procedure short, sharp, and to the point that we can explain to people what came out of ACOM 2015, your amazing experience. Thank you.
And a question here at the back, yes, is there?
I'm Henrike Landray of the Human Studies Association, and I would like to get back to one of the major thoughts of Sam. You mentioned the global partnerships, and I would be really interested in what implications that would have for the general role of the United Nations. Because business actors have always been involved with the UN, and but we haven't decreased now in the context. We have increased actors and the issues that they're dealing with. And my question is what a necessary
experiencing far more usage today than for quite some time. And secondly of all, I'm wondering how your thoughts on doing more emphasis of mediation structures meshes with the creation of mediation standby team at UN headquarters. And particularly, I would ask if you were willing to do so, a little bit to the big question about China and the UN global governance, which is really, is China going to participate within the accepting the existing framework of the norms and rule of law as is established, or do you think we are seeing more effort in the future with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank being the first step to creating a new world order, a new set of institutions established with different norms and different bases of operation?
Okay, so if we can take those three questions, who wants to start? Stephen.
Yeah. Well, very good question on the Court of Arbitration. And as the landlord of the Peace Palace, which I am, of course, I should have mentioned the Permanent Court of Arbitration. But my thoughts were occupied by improving the functioning of the United Nations. And arbitration is a very good thing, but it is based on the agreement of the two parties. My remarks tended to go in a direction that it should not be necessarily so that the two parties agree to submit to an adjudication, but that we would have a system where one party could bring a case to an institution and that institution would then pick it up. It is true, arbitration is very active nowadays. It was the first inhabitant of the Peace Palace in 1913, but it is also true that a big part of their workload is investor-state arbitration. There are not that many cases of arbitration between states. There has been one recently between India and Pakistan. I won't go into that. This was a World Bank case, but I think 90% of their caseload is investor-state. They have opened up to questions between states and private industry.
Also, a whole lot of border disputes on your agenda right
A whole lot of what?
now. Border disputes. What boundary?
Two or three.
Well, a whole lot. I think it's less than 10, and maybe even less than 5. So yes, they are still there, and they are doing extremely useful work. But my remarks did not relate to that institution. Your second point, you had another.
You suggested that you visited
Yeah.
a new mediation architecture,
Yeah.
and I was curious how that would
Well.
connect with the mediation standby team.
Well, I think the two should go together. It's not in any way meant as a deviation from the system developed now. It's more that I think that for the ambitions of The Hague to be an international city of peace and justice, it would be very positive if we could service mediations here. And I think mediations should be seen with, how can I say, there should be more interest for that part of conflict resolution. Thank you.
Yes, I was happy with the question concerning the difference between the UPR and more legally oriented individual complaints procedures. And your starting points are correct. Even if we would have the ultimate dream realized, namely a World Court of Human Rights, then there is still place for a monitoring of the general human rights performance of states, for example, in the context of the UPR or whatever review mechanism. I believe that it is very difficult to achieve. But of course, as also the former chair of ACUNS, I welcome very much that we come forward with ideas. And there is so much merit in the proposition that we have to improve the global human rights architecture, especially for people. I'm always inclined to take the position of the victims. Therefore, we have that human rights system in place. But the reality on the ground, even in the committees, has it that the bulk of the discussion is how to keep the states on board, how not to dissociate ourselves as the UN human rights protection system from our member states. That's of course a wrong starting point, because it should really be for people. We the peoples of the United Nations, every citizen, every people is vested with some human rights. But yeah, to go now for a world summit and to hope that a World Court of Human Rights will come out of it, I think is a very, very far cry. Take into account what Stephen stated about the much less far-reaching mechanism of accepting compulsory jurisdiction in interstate disputes before the International Court of Justice. So therefore my plea, don't call it for the moment a court, call it a commission. Huh? That sounds a bit less far-reaching, a mechanism. And therefore we even officially don't call it complaints mechanisms. We call it communication procedures. And we can't give a judgment, or not even a conclusion. We call it a view. We call it a recommendation to the state concerned, and that is the good point to wind up with. In fact, they comply with it. There is a remarkable good record of states following up the views, the findings, call it the judgment of human rights treaty bodies, because they do not want to be named and shamed for not complying with the views, the findings in an individual case. So yeah, that is also a small miracle, but that's in any case some good news I can give to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the broader way about the global governments and UN, because of my ability, maybe I could not make the broader to such a way as you expected. But as I say in my presentation, that now we have, because of the new situation, because there are new emerged actors, and this is reality, and they shall have a role to play. And I also say that the UN shall be further strengthened, and UN shall play the leading role. I support that, and but they shall not do it individually. At the same time, they shall do it together, coordinatively, so that we can have a better result, outcome. UN is not the master key, will not do everything now, but we still need the UN. When you say the new order, whether political order or economic order, we have been talking about that for many, many years. In my view, it is old because it has been there for many, many years, but it's also new. We are still there. It's also fresh. But I'm saying something new means to add something in order to adapt to the new situation. We shall not have an order which is frigid. If frigid means that order might not work well, might not meet the requirement of the people, of the countries. That might be the reason why we have new, maybe, I don't know, maybe one of the reason or minor reason or major reason that we have new small forums or organizations or whatever, as I mentioned in my speech. But definitely not for a new order, not the destruction of the order and to establish completely one. No, we cannot do that. Nobody can do that. I don't support that. Simply just to inject new blood to adapt ourselves to the new situation. So I don't know whether my answer can satisfy you. Thank you.
Thank you. And so lastly, Henrika's question about global partnerships and a vision for them. I suppose a really radical vision would be that the UN system would establish a hub in every country for young professionals from social sciences to natural sciences to technology experts to seek to incubate solutions to global problems. On the philanthropic question, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation it does particularly good work and is particularly politically sensitive and attuned to where the gaps are. Not all foundations are like that, and they actually account for billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, which is effectively supporting their work, yet they remain unaccountable. And I think that actually the public holding foundations to account to be part of a multi-sectoral solution is essential. Then lastly, on business, I was working in Kofi Annan's office when the Global Compact was established under John Ruggie without any General Assembly authorization. And it's been good for encouraging and incentivizing businesses to stand by principles on the environment, on human rights, on labor standards. But it can be accused of effectively blue-washing companies. They get some nice PR and do nothing in return. Instead, individual partnerships with UNICEF, WFP, with IKEA, DHL and others have actually been more practical in generating considerable leverages from the expertise that can come from the private sector. But I think our vision has to be a lot greater. Our vision has to be of increasing investment, not just companies not doing bad things. An African finance minister once quoted Karl Marx to me. Karl Marx said, in the context of unemployment, there's only one thing worse than being exploited. It's not being exploited. And I think that there's the real challenge of getting sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, investment companies, not putting billions, but putting trillions into developing countries in a way that is sustainable, in a way that's socially equitable. But we need to create the enabling environment to incentivize so that they can understand and profile the risk that would unlock that. So I think there's tremendous potential in the private sector, but it has to be done in the right way.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we've gone way over time, and also that there are a number of people who wanted to ask questions, so I'm going to have to apologize to those of you who did not get the chance to pose your question. But perhaps you may be able to speak to any one of our panelists afterwards. Could I just thank all of the audience for attending, and could I also thank our speakers for really excellent presentations.
That's interesting. I learned a lot from you about China.
I think this session is actually a contribution to a debate which will continue. And could I just finally, on behalf of ACUNS, thank our presenters, and we have here small gifts for each of you to express our appreciation.
Hi. Great speech. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Great sharing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very kind of you.
Hello. Thank you for your question.
Hi, presentation.
Yes, I looked
Yeah?
at you after.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I had to go.
No problem. I thought I might say sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Mary.
I have just a few minutes.
Yes,
I don't want to take you away.
Should we do that straight after the session? Yeah, I'll see if there's anything. Great. Hey, great question. Thank you for that.
I have a follow-up for you.
Hi.
From Aging Forest Studies, you were married a couple of years ago.
We did, I remember. Yeah, fantastic to see you again. Yeah, likewise. Yes, I'm leaving in about 5:30, I think, today.
Very good, thank you. Thank you very much.
I couldn't resist. And knowing you've been in the foreign ministry, I figured you'd figure out a way to handle it.
Thank you very much.
That's interesting. Very modern speech.
So maybe we could have lunch.
I'm learning.
Yeah,
From Dutch,
that'd be
learning from
great.
America,
See,
I
there's
doing
one
tour
other person,
ourselves.
Gregory Fox.
You know each other from China?
We met, we met
Only met the
other
last
night.
one. Yeah, the other
Are you going to the...
I do come quite often to China, since I married myself into China. My wife is from Peking,
Yeah, this
Peking
one. Is that
University
where-
School of
or
Law.
are we going there?
And, we
Keep up a
married.
man, keep up a man.
So my daughter is at the moment in China.
Your wife is there? Or
No, my wife is now fortunately with me, or I'm a few days with her, let's put it that way. And, but I married 26 years ago, and most of the time we have been living here. but
Very
also, but
visionable.
but I go every year to China. It's the power of the woman to bring you to her place of origin.
Well, once you are underdeveloped, whatever you do, I mean, there's an improvement, is growing up, But gradually, but we still have a lot of poverty.
I do
you
so.
go to the West, which is poverty there.
But I do hope that China will join civil and political rights sooner or later.
When they signed, that's a very good signal. Because you signed,
2002,
they're not too much different with the ratification.
No.
You had to buy.
Yeah, but I understood because I went a few times to the Foreign Office, also in my capacity as the rapporteur on China, and so I understood they are now article by article see what it means for domestic legislation. But obviously they are politically a bit.
Some people mentally, they need to
Because,
do more,
China
to do broad more to get acquaintance so they know. You can know the world. Otherwise, you don't know the world. It's a changing world.
You could make some reservations if you don't like it, but it's a full right. And very good you put human rights into the constitution of 2004. But now, as a result of probably internal power struggle.
Imagine 20 years ago, if you're talking about human rights in China, people are scared, better on top. But today,
Before I disappear off,
Yes.
just a card to say
Okay.
thanks
Yes.
as well.
Yeah. That was a great panel, and I was really torn. Will I let it run on? Of course, it did run on anyway, but it was really difficult to stop at 12:30.
Yeah.
But it was just a great.
One has to, the secret of good entertainment, always leave them wanting more, right?
Yes. Well, I think we've left them wanting more, even though we've run over as well.
allowed for in the
in the same way that the UN Charter